Tonight on Bridge City News, a day of mourning is taking place in Lethbridge this weekend, honoring those who lost their lives in the workplace. Summer means more pesticides and insecticides. How much of a risk are they for your pet? Loris Alexander investigates. And police in Calgary are not holding out much hope that a young mother and her daughter are still alive.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Elections Alberta released their official results today of how many voted in the provincial election. A record 1,905,520 votes were cast. The advance polls also saw 36.7% of people vote. That too is a record as the highest seen in any Canadian provincial or territorial election. One of the closest ridings in the province was right here in Lethbridge West, which saw the NDP Shannon Phillips beat UCP's Kerry Flatla by just 226 votes. A special day of mourning will be taking place this Sunday from noon till 1 p.m. at the Mountain View Cemetery in Lethbridge. It's to honor those who lost their lives while on the job. One of the vice presidents of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, Susan Slade, will be giving some remarks on behalf of the union. The EUPE says in 2018, 162 Albertans were killed due to workplace injuries or illnesses. Bert Green is a former chief steward with CUPE Local 70, and he says the day of mourning is important for so many.
Because lives are forever changed. As soon as they get that knock on the door, I got a cold feeling just as I said that. And so you can well imagine what those people that lose someone out in the work site go through. And they go through it for life. It's a very special thing for me because, you know, knowing people and being around it and seeing it. And very dear to my heart. Very dear to my heart.
The National Day of Mourning was officially recognized by the Canadian government in 1991, 8 years after the Day of Remembrance was launched by the Canadian Labour Congress. The Day of Mourning has since spread to 80 countries around the world. With warm weather, we see a lot more bugs, fleas, and ticks. Many people try to control the pests by spraying their yards. But how safe are those chemicals for your pets? BCN's Loris Alexander investigates to find out how much danger your dog or cat may be in.
Do you shake? No. It's one of those things where I think it's always kind of in the back of your head, like what? I mean, if we're walking, our dog around the neighborhood, it's like there's things out there that could hurt him, but I mean, like, how can you tell what's not safe and what's safe? There's really nothing out there that says, hey, this is what's going to hurt my dog.
It's easy to overlook your four-legged companions when you think about the toxins that your family could be ingesting through the products around the home and lawn.
A lot of pesticides are toxic to dogs and cats, and so when we're using them on our yards and things like that, if you think about dogs and even the cats going outside and you've got those ones that like to munch on the vegetation like the grass and that, then they're being exposed to products that they shouldn't be ingesting, and it can cause all sorts of things with toxicities like tremors, vomiting, diarrhea, even seizures.
Pippa says pesticides are a risk and following directions is a must.
It's a risk not only to them, but also to little humans and the human population in the house. And so I think those are things that we need to consider. If people are using pesticides around their yards if they need to, I think making sure that they're used in areas that they're not open to where the pets can come in contact with them, and really reading label directions.
Some of the effects a pet may have are tremors and seizures.
Some that I've seen in the past is organophosphate poisoning. So those pets have got into a product and they come in and they're salivating, they've got muscle tremors and they're seizuring.
Pay attention to your pet, which I hope most people would, right? Like if you're walking your dog down the street and you see them going somewhere that maybe they shouldn't be, like, please pull them away. Please watch your pets, make sure they're safe. And for homeowners, you know what I mean? If you're going to be spraying something on your lawn, get one of those lawn signs. Get like the little flags you stick in the lawn, right? Something to say, hey, we just sprayed here, so our pets can stay safe.
Pippa says, if in doubt, call your vet immediately, but ensure you watch your pet at all times. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
A couple in Cardston is tired of the tough real estate market, so they're getting creative with how they're going to sell their historic bed and breakfast property. Ainsley O'Reilly explains that for just $100, you could be the owner of this bed and breakfast.
For 2 years, Ivan Neckrich and his wife have been trying to sell their historic Cardston bed and breakfast with no luck on any reasonable offers. Now they're getting creative.
It's not a lottery and it's not a raffle. It's a contest where people have to write a letter in explaining who they are and why they would like to own Cobblestone Manor. And it's going to be a 500-page essay or less. And with a $100 fee, we're trying to get up to 17,000 letters. And we put a value on a property of $1.7 million.
The winner will be decided by 4 judges plus the couple, and they're looking for someone with a passion for business.
We're looking for somebody who has the energy and the willingness to develop it farther and to run it and turn it into a family business.
For the Neckriches, this move is long overdue. They're both in their 70s and say it's about time they can relax. The word relax used loosely as they've adopted and raised 2 boys under the age of 12. For these boys, the Cobblestone Manor is all they've ever known.
It feels kind of awkward because I'm so used to being here because I stayed here for 11 years. And this might be my last year being here.
For the boys, one of their favorite activities in the manor was hide and seek.
We have an old clock, a grandfather clock, and it's in the corner, and me and him slip behind sometimes. Yeah. Slip behind it.
Full contest details will be on the Cobblestone Manor Facebook page, but so far 25,000 people have been reached on the platform. The contest opens on May 1st and will close in November. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Several Lethbridge area residents armed with rakes, shovels, and gloves arrived at Chinook Regional Hospital this morning to take part in the annual spring cleanup. The volunteers were needed to help with tidying the grounds, picking up garbage, raking, bagging, mulching, and pulling weeds.
Well, we're raking over all the mulch and that because the winter has been gone and it kind of flattens everything down, which doesn't look very pretty for the hospital. So we get the volunteers over to fluff everything up and to help me rake up leaves and this and that.
Honestly, I received an email saying that they needed some help, and so I was off today from work and wanted to help the community out today.
This program has been going on now for the last 5 years, and I've been running the groups all the time, and they are just fantastic people to work with. And I couldn't do what I do here without them.
The spring cleanup is part of the Outdoor Beautification Project, a partnership between Alberta Health Services and community groups wishing to invest in their local health facility. Police in Calgary say they are treating the disappearance of a woman and a toddler as potential homicides. They say they have found no evidence that 25-year-old Jasmine Lovett or her 22-month-old daughter, Alia Sanderson, are still alive. Police say they have a suspect in custody.
The last place anyone saw either of the two was in the community of Cranston on the evening of Tuesday, April 16th, 2019. So I can confirm that on April 16th, Jasmine and Leah are alive in the community of Cranston. We have Jasmine's bank card being used for an online purchase on the 18th, but we still can't determine if that was her who was purchasing. And police responded to her residence in the community of Cranston the night of April 23rd, based on concerns from her immediate family that she failed to show for a pre-planned family dinner. We took a suspect into custody for questioning this morning. No charges have been laid as of yet. We do not believe this incident to be random because the suspect and the victims knew each other.
A fatality inquiry wrapped up yesterday into the 2015 shooting death of RCMP officer David Wynn. The incident took place at a casino in St. Albert. His widow, Shelley Wynn, says she hopes what happened will lead to positive changes within the system.
Unfortunately, I can't bring him back. I can't change that. So just moving forward, the only thing we can do is to keep changing and making positive changes within the system. And hoping to just break the cycle. Sean Wren was a product of his environment at home. And I'm not excusing what he did, but right from the get-go, he really didn't stand a chance in life.
Shirley Wynn says she is planning on starting a foundation under David Wynn's name to help support children who need it. 3 people were arrested for child endangerment and charged with various drug offenses after a big narcotics bust took place in Fort McMurray. Alert investigators, along with the Wood Buffalo RCMP, seized more than $58,000 worth of drugs and cash at a house, including 151 grams of cocaine. A young child who was also in the home was taken by Alberta Children's Services on April 17th. Please say if you suspect any drug or gang-related activity in your neighborhood to call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-8477. Ontario Premier Doug Ford visited the west end of Ottawa today to speak with residents affected by the damaging flood of the Ottawa River. He also spoke on the need for more volunteers. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, who's had to deal with the rising floodwaters in Ottawa, says residents in many flood-prone regions are getting frustrated by their government's lack of compensation.
And what a lot of people want to hear is about measures, concrete measures from the provincial and the federal governments to help those communities who are impacted more and more often by those severe floods. Adaptation to climate change. As I said, the Prime Minister had basically the same speech on Wednesday as he had 2 years ago, and very little was done in Gatineau, Quebec, in those flood-prone areas to help people cope with climate change and the impact of rising waters.
Catch the full interview with Monsieur Fillion discussing flooding concerns and who is trying to recruit former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould. That's coming up after business news. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says provinces trying to block the federal carbon tax are short-sighted and irresponsible. So far, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick have challenged the tax in court. Alberta may be next.
And look no further than Ontario to find a provincial government that's wasting taxpayers' money fighting climate action in court while ignoring their commitments to protect species at risk. It's short-sighted and irresponsible. And frankly, Canadians deserve better. That's why, after a decade of inaction under the previous government, our government committed to making real progress to protect and preserve nature across Canada.
Dr. Ross McKittrick is an economics professor at the University of Guelph. He recently wrote an article on climate change called "Hold the Panic, Canada Just Warmed 1.7 degrees and Thrived." Dr. McKittrick says Ottawa should not be scaring Canadians about climate change, since he says it's more of a natural phenomenon.
Also, Canada is a northern country. Part of the Arctic is in our land mass. And another feature of the way the climate system works is the polar regions are supposed to warm faster than the lower latitudes. So that, again, pulls up the average for Canada. What it doesn't mean, though, is if anyone thinks that this means because we're a heavy emitter or that means we're more polluted, that's a complete misreading. And I think in that sense, for Environment Canada to keep headlining a statement like that, it almost invites a misinterpretation.
Watch the full interview with Dr. McKittrick and Paul Arthur discussing climate change coming up in the second half of our show. Bridge City News has obtained footage inside of St. Anthony's Church following the deadly bombing and an Easter Sunday attack in the Sri Lankan capital of Colombo. Footage captured showed shattered glass, personal possessions, and other debris across the inside of the building. The church was one of many sites that were targeted last Sunday, resulting in the deaths of over 300 people. More than 50 have been detained by police in connection with the attacks. Sri Lankan officials say the search continues for even more suspects in the bombings. Some snow mixed with rain is in the forecast this weekend. In fact, it may be the perfect time to check out a movie or two. With a look at what's playing at the Mill this weekend, here's Len Binning with another Movie Mill Minute.
While everybody loves animation, and Wonder Park is no exception, June is a wildly imaginative young girl, and one day in the forest she discovers an old roller coaster. Well, she climbs inside, and what ensues is nothing short of magical. We all remember Freaky Friday from Disney, the film where the bodies change places, the old goes into the young. Corporate life just becomes difficult for this woman, and one day magically she wakes up as her younger self in this comedy. Let's take a look.
How did you go from this to this? You went to bed grown and then you woke up little. That's for white people, because black people don't have the time.
Stella Grant is a typical teenager. Loves her social media, loves her friends. However, her life's a little different as she spends most of it in the hospital.
You followed me. With the intent of introducing myself. I'm Will Newman.
You're the kind of guy that ignores the rules because it makes you feel in control. Am I right?
You're not wrong.
You think that's cute?
Do you think it's cute?
Looks like some solid family fun at the movie mill. A cool weekend is in the forecast. In fact, we may even see more of the white stuff. Complete weather details are coming up. Cool and windy today. Tonight, a chance of showers or flurries developing with a low near 0. Tomorrow, rain developing with a high near 10. Cooling off considerably on Sunday with a chance of snow and a high near 2 degrees. A high pressure system returns on Monday, clearing out the clouds and bringing us a high near 7. Sunshine and 7 as well for Tuesday. Wednesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 10. Thursday, a slight chance of showers developing and a high near 8 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 15 and an average low of +1. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1992 at 27 degrees, and the record low was -13 in 1967. Sunrise was at 6:18, sunset at 8:30. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Expect lots of sunshine at 14 for Victoria, a slight chance of rain at 13 is on tap for Vancouver. Showers and 7 degrees for Calgary tomorrow. Periods of snow and +1 expected in Edmonton. Rain and 9 for Regina. Showers and 7 for Saskatoon on Saturday. Mainly sunny and 11 for Winnipeg. Rain mixed with snow and a high near 9 for Toronto tomorrow. Rain and snow as well for Ottawa and a high of only +2. Showers and 6 for Montreal. In the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have thunder showers and 11. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have periods of drizzle and 14. Rain and 10 in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow mixed with cloud and a high near 4 degrees for Saturday. Canada's Privacy Commissioner is taking Facebook to court after finding the social media giant's poor security allowed personal information to be used for political purposes.
Given Facebook's response, my office plans to take the matter to federal court to seek an order to force Facebook to correct its privacy practices. The existing accountability requirement under the law is an important safeguard, but as we have so clearly seen in this case, it is not sufficient to protect Canadians from the practices of companies that do not behave responsibly.
Clean Farms Canada says 5.8 million empty plastic containers were returned to ag retail and municipal collection sites in 2018. That's an increase of 14% compared to 2017. The recycling program is marking the 30th anniversary with around 126 million plastic jugs being turned into products like garbage bags, flexible irrigation pipe, and farm drainage tile. Clean Farms estimates a return rate of around 65%. The recycling initiative expanded into plastic grain bags last year. Husky Energy is reporting a first quarter profit of $328 million or 32 cents a share for the 3 months ending March 31st. That's up from $248 million or 24 cents per share a year earlier. Production in the quarter averaged 285,200 barrels of oil per day. That's down from 300,400 barrels in the same quarter last year. Husky says the decline was due mainly to the mandated Alberta government production cuts. It was also because of an oil spill off the coast of Newfoundland in January. Ride-hailing giant Uber is planning to sell 180 million shares for between $44 and $50 per share. That values the company between $80.5 and $91.5 billion. That's lower than the previous estimate of $120 billion. Uber gave potential investors a first look at its finances earlier this month, revealing nearly $8 billion in losses over the past 10 years. Work messaging platform Slack has filed with the SEC to go public today. It's the latest in several highly anticipated tech IPOs. Slack says it made $400 million in revenue last year on net loss of $138.9 million. Slack plans to list its stock with the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker SK. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a special day of mourning will be taking place this Sunday, noon till 1 p.m. at the Mountain View Cemetery. It's to honor those who lost their lives while on the job. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says in 2018, 162 Albertans were killed due to workplace illnesses or injuries. The National Day of Mourning was officially recognized by the Canadian government in 1991. It has since spread to 80 countries around the world. A blue wave has been sweeping across Canada, with more Conservative governments being elected. Now, what does that mean for the federal Liberals and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau? Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, will explain next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The annual Pottery and Glass Art Spring Show and Sale is being held from May 2nd to the 4th at the Westminster Community Hall in Lethbridge. Discover unique gifts and home decor made by local artists, such as jewelry, stained glass windows, dish sets, mugs, and so much more. Admission is free. For more information, visit the Old Man River Potters Guild Facebook page. Come for a fun time and help support a worthy cause. The Kidney Foundation Southern Alberta branch is hosting a 3-kilometer and 6-kilometer walk or run on Saturday, May 11th at Henderson Lake Park. Register individually or as a team by calling 1-866-956-2724 or go online to kidneywalk.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
A new controversy has arisen involving Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. To tell us more about it is our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion. Ray, the PM is vetting potential judges with a Liberal Party database.
Yeah, that's right. This is a story that was brought to us by the Globe and Mail earlier this week. They revealed that when the Prime Minister's office get its short list from the independent committees that they've set up, basically a group of headhunters who go around the country and look for potential judges to be named to the court or promoted. After that, the Prime Minister does its own vetting, and one of the steps that they're using is they're running the candidates' names through a Liberal Party database. This is a partisan tool called Liberalist, and it allows them to know whether or not the person has contributed any money to the Liberal Party over the last few years, whether or not that person has been involved politically with the Liberal Party. And the Globe and Mail has found that out of the 289 judges across the country who were named or promoted since 2016, 25% of them had given money to the Liberal Party of Canada, and only 6% had contributed money to the Conservative Party, the NDP, or the Greens. The NDP says it's a clear case of the Liberals rewarding their friends primarily, liberal justice, liberal-friendly judges and lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. But the Prime Minister's office says it has nothing to do with partisanship. They claim that candidates are being assessed based on their own merits. And the fact that they give money to the Liberal Party, they say, is neither an advantage nor a disadvantage. They say that they name people strictly on merit. But this is kind of awkward, and it's, following the SNC-Lavalin controversy, this is just another thing that is kind of embarrassing for the Prime Minister's office.
Yeah, you can be sure that Andrew Scheer will be bringing it up now and again in the fall. Now, Ray, there appears to be a blue wave sweeping over the nation. Ontario went Conservative, so did Alberta. Now Prince Edward Island with the minority government. It appears as though Justin Trudeau is losing many of his allies.
Well, yeah, the Canadian Federation is becoming harder and harder to manage for the Liberal Prime Minister here in Ottawa. You're right. Alberta, Ontario, New Brunswick, and now PEI, they all went from a different color than blue to Tory blue. And that's just over the past couple of years. So Canada is becoming increasingly difficult to manage for the Prime Minister. The big question a lot of people have is, does this new situation make it easier for Andrew Scheer to win the upcoming federal election in October? Yes and no. I think it's both a blessing and a curse. I think, yes, he's got way more allies and Justin Trudeau way more adversaries in the provinces. But on the flip side, there is a risk for Andrew Scheer in that he could be overshadowed by some of his provincial allies, especially the ones who are well known nationally. I'm talking about here Jason Kenney, of course, in Alberta, and Doug Ford here in Ontario. And the other thing is, you'll notice over the years, Canadian voters tend to hedge their bets. When it comes to provincial and federal elections, they tend to vote one way in their province and then a different way, a different color at the federal level. So whether or not this is good news or bad news for Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer, I think it still remains to be seen. I remain convinced that people in the October federal election are going to vote based on who the candidates are, what the issues are nationally. I don't think they're going to be influenced in any way, shape, or form by how they voted in their provincial election. That's my view, at least.
Now, Ray, there's a rumor that former Liberal MP Jody Wilson-Raybould may join the Green Party. Where did that rumor originate?
Well, she has said so publicly. She's interested in perhaps joining another political party, not the Conservatives, because they're ideologically too far removed from her own beliefs. But Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, and Elizabeth May, the national leader of the Green Party, have both made it clear that they're interested in recruiting Jody Wilson-Raybould, and Jane Philpott, who has also said that she's considering running under a different banner or perhaps as an independent in October. And, the funny thing is Elizabeth May got married on Monday. It was Earth Day. That's why she got married on a Monday. And who attended the wedding reception? Jody Wilson-Raybould. This could be just a coincidence. The two women are good friends, or it could mean something. I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Ms. Wilson-Raybould said earlier this week that she doesn't think her career as a politician is over yet. So she's probably going to be running in the October election. Remains to be seen whether it's going to be as an independent or under the Green Party banner or the NDP. So we'll have to wait and see.
Our country's Transport Minister, Marc Garneau, says the Trans Mountain Pipeline project is the government's #1 priority. But Ray, Albertans have heard that song and dance before.
Yeah, you can't blame Albertans for being skeptical here, although this time the feds say they mean it. Mr. Garneau said he expects his government will make a final decision in June. That final decision was supposed to come in February, but we're told that because some consultations with some Indigenous groups and some Native communities are still ongoing, that decision's been delayed until June. And the minister was clear this week in a couple of interviews. Mr. Garneau says the Trans Mountain Pipeline project is the government's #1 priority. The thing is, this file has been nothing but a curse so far for the Liberals. A lot of people, especially in Alberta, Saskatchewan, out west, complain that the government hasn't been proactive enough. They've dragged their feet on this file. And meanwhile, a lot of people in Quebec and in other provinces, environmental groups are blaming the Trudeau Liberals for pushing the agenda. So I get the feeling that whichever way the Prime Minister decides, people are going to be unhappy at the end of the day.
Ray, floods have ravaged many areas of Canada, central Canada, Quebec, and Ontario, especially Ottawa, where you are. Our nation's capital has declared a state of emergency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that call came on Thursday afternoon, the city of Ottawa declaring a state of emergency because many communities within the city and also in the outlying areas are severely affected. And this is just, unfortunately, history repeating itself once again. The Prime Minister visited Gatineau, Quebec, on the other side of the Ottawa River here on Wednesday. He was there with his rubber boots. He saw some soldiers. He also met with some people who've had to flee their homes because of the flooding. And the thing is, the Prime Minister was there just 2 years ago. Gatineau was hit hard by the floods in 2017. The Prime Minister talked about the impact that climate change is having, that the fact that those floods are happening more and more often in many parts of the country because of climate change. And here he was again, once again this week on Wednesday in Gatineau, basically having the same message. And what a lot of people want to hear is about measures, concrete measures from the provincial and the federal governments to help those communities who are impacted more and more often by those severe floods. Adaptation to climate change. As I said, the Prime Minister had basically the same speech on Wednesday as he had 2 years ago, and very little was done in Gatineau, Quebec, in those flood-prone areas to help people cope with climate change and the impact of rising waters. Now, the federal government has said, the infrastructure minister, François-Philippe Champagne, this week, he publicly said that there's $2 billion on the table to help those communities adapt, build dikes, and so on and so forth. He says he's just waiting for a request from the provinces. And, those requests have yet to come. But the federal government says they're willing to fast track the money to help those people who badly need it.
Ray, there's a new report which says that 20,000 sensitive documents were mishandled under the Trudeau government. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, 19,787 classified documents that were mishandled. We're not talking about documents that fell into the wrong hands here. We're simply talking about classified or sensitive documents that weren't stored properly in various government departments. And the really surprising thing is that over that period, we're talking about nearly 20,000 documents mishandled over the last 2 years. During that same time period, only one government employee has had his security clearance revoked. And we're talking about one employee who works with the health department. So there seems to be a lot of negligence inside the government with very few people held to account.
Facebook has received a scathing report from our country's privacy commissioner.
Absolutely. The Canadian Privacy Commissioner, along with his British Columbia counterpart, they looked over the past year or so into the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Now, you'll recall that Cambridge Analytica is that former company in Great Britain that managed to get its hands on the private information of thousands, millions of Facebook users around the world. And some of that information was apparently used to try and influence the vote in the 2016 US presidential election, as well as in the UK referendum on Brexit a couple of years ago. Scathing report for Facebook. The Federal Privacy Commissioner saying that Facebook's settings to protect people's private information are not up to date. They're basically an eggshell. This is the expression that he used. He says he's made recommendation, but Facebook has rejected all of those recommendations by the Federal Privacy Commissioner. Now, Daniel Thérien says that he's going to go to court to try and force the company's hands. And he's also calling on the federal government to do something about it, to legislate, because he says something needs to be done. He believes that the Cambridge Analytica scandal, which happened in the United States and the UK, could also happen in our next federal election here next fall. So he wants the government to do something ASAP. The Democratic Institutions Minister said on Thursday that she's considering it. They're doing consultations right now, but obviously nothing is going to happen given the short time frame between now and the next election. It's going to be something, if the federal government enacts legislation to deal with Facebook, it's going to be done after the election.
The federal Liberals are still undecided on whether former PMO Principal Secretary Jerry Butts will have any role in the October federal election. Ray, wasn't he one of the key figures in helping get Trudeau elected in 2015?
Oh, absolutely. He was one of the main architects of that big Liberal victory, the majority government that they won back in 2015. I do believe that he's still around. I mean, he doesn't have a formal role within the PMO. He doesn't have a formal role either with the Liberal Party of Canada. But remember, he and Justin Trudeau are best friends. They go way back to their university days, at McGill in Montreal. So I do believe that Justin Trudeau talks to him quite a lot, and he probably has his fingerprints on a lot of Liberal Party policies, even as we speak, even though he's no longer formally working for the Trudeau Liberals.
Now, there's a recent report that says SNC-Lavalin's nuclear contracts are at risk if the company is convicted. Ray, we're talking about billions upon billions of dollars of new contractual obligations over the next 10 years, which are crucial to the global nuclear industry and our country's future development.
Well, yeah, especially here in Canada, because you got to understand that if the company is convicted of those charges that it's facing, fraud and corruption, SNC-Lavalin, a big Montreal engineering firm based in Quebec, would be barred from government contracts for a period of 10 years. Now, here in Ontario, the province is planning to refurbish some major nuclear reactors. And if SNC-Lavalin is no longer eligible to get those contracts, well, chances are the province and many other provinces across the country are going to have to turn probably to foreign companies based in the United States. For now, the company has failed in its efforts to obtain a DPA, a deferred prosecution agreement, which would allow it to avoid a criminal trial and ultimately a conviction. But the file, as far as we know, is still on the desk of the new federal Justice Minister, David Lametti, who won't say which way he's leaning. My bet is if the company does obtain a DPA from the federal Justice Minister, it's probably going to be after the election, because SNC-Lavalin is a name that's become basically toxic in federal politics, especially outside of Quebec. In Quebec, they want to save that company. It's a Quebec-based company. It employs thousands of people, not just in Quebec, but in the rest of Canada as well. But its headquarters are in Quebec, so they're doing everything in Quebec to try and protect that company, understandably so.
And you can be sure that Andrew Scheer is going to be harping on SNC-Lavalin as we get closer and closer to the fall federal election. Right, Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Poloz said this week that our economy has slowed down and therefore he's not raising the central bank rate above the current 1.75%. Now that's good news for those of us with credit cards and lines of credit, but what does the future hold?
Well, yeah, quite a change of tone from the Bank of Canada this week, because for months now they've been warning Canadians, especially those with heavy debt loads, that increases were coming. And to be fair, we had a few interest rate increases over the past couple of years. But its report on Monday, the Bank of Canada's report on Tuesday or Wednesday, there was absolutely no talk of another hike anytime soon, and that's because the economy has slowed down considerably. The central bank is now predicting growth of 1.2% for the year 2019. They're talking also about a growth in the economy of 0.3% in the first 3 months of 2019. Now, you're pretty close to zero, so they've decided to wait and see what happens. The biggest liability, as we said before, for the Canadian economy is consumer debt, household debt. Once again, the bank is their underlying message this week was for people to lower their debt burden. But I don't know if people are willing to do that unless interest rates go up again.
That's true. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Filion, joining us once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
You bet.
A recent report commissioned by Environment and Climate Change Canada got a lot of media coverage. The headlines read, "Canada warmed twice as fast as the entire planet since 1948. Well, we're joined by Dr. Ross McKittrick, professor of economics at the University of Guelph. He recently wrote an article published in the Financial Post entitled, "Hold the Panic, Canada just warmed 1.7 degrees and thrived." That is an alarming headline, Professor McKittrick, but you believe saying Canada warmed twice as fast as the whole planet doesn't actually prove anything?
Well, no, it doesn't. First of all, because we've long known that whenever you have a warming phase going on, regardless of the cause, the land warms faster than the oceans. 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean, so whatever land mass you pick is going to warm faster than the global average. And so if they'd looked at Russia or areas of the southern hemisphere even, they would have found the land areas warm faster than the global average because the average is pulled down by the oceans. Also, Canada is a northern country. Part of the Arctic is in our land mass. And another feature of the way the climate system works is the polar regions are supposed to warm faster than the lower latitudes. So that again pulls up the average for Canada. What it doesn't mean, though, is if anyone thinks that this means because we're a heavy emitter or that means we're more polluted, that's a complete misreading. And I think in that sense, for Environment Canada to keep headlining a statement like that, it almost invites a misinterpretation.
Right, yeah, because that's the implication. I think people just kind of bite on that just automatically, right? Now, if it were, and if it is true, if faster warming is happening in Canada, is that necessarily a bad thing for us here? I mean, again, with the winter we had here, we're kind of going, it sounds good, right?
Well, one of the points that I made in the article was that within Canada, there are some regions that warmed twice as fast as other regions, or even 3 times as fast. And wherever you live, chances are one season might have warmed twice as fast as another. And we hardly notice these things. In fact, if you're not sure whether spring or fall warmed faster for you wherever you live, if you wouldn't know unless you looked in the report. That just tells you how little it mattered to you over the years. Another perspective is to talk to an 80-year-old, because they were entering their teens at the time these temperature records began, 1948. So from the 50s to the present, ask them what they experienced in their life. What were the changes that they lived through? And I'm sure they'll have a long list of things that they can talk about, of all the things that have changed. I really doubt they're going to highlight minor changes in the weather. But if they did, chances are they would say, it feels like winter's a bit shorter and less brutally cold than it used to be, and that's a good thing. I'm glad about that.
Right, so it's not necessarily a big negative. Okay. By the way, this climate change report was released on the very same day the government's new carbon tax regime came into effect in 4 provinces. So now that's probably just coincidence, right, Professor McKittrick?
Well, a lot of people pointed to that coincidence, that the report was leaked on the same day as the carbon tax came into play. It came into place. Now, you can tell from the report they've been working on it a long time, so maybe they had always scheduled it for that particular day, but yeah, a lot of people found that suspicious.
Somewhat convenient, it would seem. Now, you write in your report a little bit about confirmation bias. What is that exactly, and how does it work?
Well, confirmation bias arises when you have a certain idea in your head and you start just seeing evidence that confirms it. You are sort of tuned out of any evidence that may conflict with it, and you only really pay attention to things that confirm it. Now, we've been hearing from the government over and over for many, many years, for decades now, that climate change is happening and it's a hazardous, dangerous, terrible thing. And so what you see as far as confirmation bias goes is now anytime there's a bad storm, for instance, or if there's a hot day in the summer, then people say, oh, well, that's evidence of climate change. As if we didn't used to get thunderstorms and hot days in the summer, and as if there didn't used to be forest fires or things like that. So confirmation bias in a case like this arises. You hear it when politicians talk about the importance of climate policy because we have so many forest fires or we have extreme weather events. The obvious rejoinder there is we've always had forest fires and we've always had extreme weather events. To settle that, what you have to do is go and look at the data. Are we getting more forest fires than we used to? Are we getting more extreme weather events than we used to? And that's where the federal government's own data makes it clear that no, actually we're not. The National Forest Service has data going back decades on forest fire rates in Canada, and at least since the 1990s, they've been trending down, not up. And as far as extreme weather goes, the new report from Environment Canada doesn't assert that we're seeing more extreme rainfall events or extreme precipitation events. And other data sets that Environment Canada has put out recently confirm that most cities across the country haven't seen any change, and to the extent there's a pattern, we actually have fewer heavy downpour events now than we did 20, 30 years ago.
That is fascinating. I think there is something to that confirmation bias as well. It reminds me of, when you buy a new car, and then suddenly you notice the same brand of car all over the place because it's new to you and you're looking for it.
Yeah,
so again, it's a
exactly
psychological effect, I think, right? Suddenly we notice it. And those cars have been there the whole time, right? So now, when we have a really dry season, wet, cold, hot season, whatever it might be, is that the exception, again, or is it a trend? We talk about natural weather cycles that repeat themselves over the centuries. You mentioned the 80-year-old, so forth, going back to, over time. You point out last summer when the media hyped a report from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, warning that 1.5 degrees of warming was a disaster threshold. And yet, the title of your article there, Canada has warmed 1.7 degrees since 1948, but, no panic, So did we miss something here?
Well, isn't that an interesting question? Last summer, we were told over and over, if you cross 1.5 degrees of warming compared to pre-industrial times, that will be a catastrophe. We have to avoid it at all costs. Now we're told, oh, we actually warmed 1.7 degrees just since 1948. Was it a catastrophe? Well, no, actually the country got a lot better off over that time. Our incomes have gone up, population's gone up, lifespan has gone up, health has improved. On every measure we have, things pretty much got better. So if that's a catastrophe, I only wish every catastrophe looked like that.
That's a good way to put it. Now, I think what seems to convince the public that this is alarm-worthy is that so many of the reports make claims that virtually all of the world's climate change scientists agree that the planet is warming up dangerously fast. So what do we do with that?
Well, what you do with that is you look at what the scientists, who was surveyed, first of all, and what they were actually asked. Now, the way you summarized it is the classic summary that 97% of the world's scientists believe climate's changing, it's a hazard, dangerous thing, and it's our fault. The surveys don't actually ask that. What's usually asked is, do you think the climate is warming? Do humans have a role to play, or do humans play a role in that? And you get very high agreement. In fact, I personally don't know anyone who works in this field who would disagree with those statements, but they're very general. If you then get to asking, do you think most of the warming is caused by greenhouse gases? Then the agreement begins to shrink. And if you say, and do you think this is a crisis or a problem that we should devote a lot of resources to trying to stop? Then the agreement is even lower, and you just get into the realm of active debate and people on both sides of those questions. So it's a research area, which means people hold different points of view and the data aren't clear, and that's why people argue about it. So what you do with the point you raised is there is very high agreement, obviously, on things like carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, and that compared to the 1800s, the world is warmer today on many measures, a little bit warmer. But are humans the dominant cause? And looking to the future, is this going to be a big problem that we should try to avoid? It's much harder to find agreement on those issues.
Mm-hmm. In fact, U.S. climate scientist Judith Curry had this to say last year: extreme values of possible sea level rise are regarded as so unlikely that we cannot even assign a probability. So, if you don't follow the crowd, I think what happens is you start to get called names, you don't get invited to certain high-profile events to speak, you may lose funding. So, my question is, how is this in any way a scientific approach? Normally scientists are quite, and maybe the scientists are, and maybe it's the media hype, I don't know, but I seem to recall that Galileo kind of unfollowed the crowd as well, right?
Yeah, it is a field, especially for younger scientists, it is very hard for them to dissent from what appears to be a party line in the field. And now, if you look at what they're publishing, if you look at the studies that are in the journals, it's, like I say, the points of view all over the place. And even within reports like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there's a wide range of points of view in there, and a lot of different conclusions can be supported based on the evidence that's in those reports. But as far as who has the dominant voice in the field and who are the people on the news every night and who tend to be the senior people in the government panels, that is a much smaller group of people, and they hold a lot of influence in their profession. And it makes me glad, actually, that I'm in the field of economics, not in the field of climatology, because I think it would be very difficult if I was a young academic starting out, I think it would be very difficult to be in that field just because of the intense pressure to follow the party line.
It would take an immense amount of courage, no doubt about it. Another frequent claim that all climate scientists believe climate change is caused by humans. And again, it's not that they don't agree to that, but to what extent, right? So let's pretend that, this giant, bright, hot, shiny object we call the sun might have a part to play too. There's certainly other factors that I think we need to take a very close look at, right?
Yeah. Now, that takes it out of the areas that I've looked at closely, although I can say, just looking at it from a statistical perspective, that it's extremely difficult to identify long, slow changes in any data set. The tools that we have for the length of data that's available for climate observations mean we can look at changes that happen on short time scales and try to correlate them with things that might have driven those changes on short time scales. But it is known that there are long, slow cyclical patterns and natural sources of variability in the climate system long before there was any cars on the road or before people were using fossil fuels. We know that the climate went in and out of warm and cool periods, and it's there in the paleo record and the geological record. And obviously, those are natural changes. They weren't driven by greenhouse gases. So trying to explain what caused all those, and we can't assume that all those factors suddenly stopped having any effect as of 1850. They're still active and they still affect the climate system. So this issue of natural variability, what are the mechanisms, what are the big drivers, that's an extremely important topic. I don't think it gets nearly enough attention. There's just been so much work trying to attribute changes to greenhouse gas emissions. It's a lot harder to find active research out there on, well, you mentioned the sun and other sources of natural climate variability.
Yeah, that does make sense when you really think it through step by step. Now, after several decades now of alarmist claims, the sky is falling, the sea is rising, glaciers are melting, and so forth, at what point does society say, I cry wolf, enough is enough?
It is an interesting feature of public opinion surveys that despite the enormous amount of PR, the effort of environmentalists, but also of government ministries and government agencies, the public opinion needle hasn't really moved a whole lot. There's a concern out there. There's a general sense of concern, as there would be for any environmental issue, that climate change, we hear it's a threat, and so the public want to make sure that someone competent is looking at that and dealing with it. But as far as a public priority, polls keep showing that it's at the bottom of the list, and election outcomes keep showing that parties that try to push, in the name of climate change, if they push very expensive policies that cost jobs or drive up energy prices, no matter what people tell pollsters, when it's their livelihoods and their job and their ability to afford the energy they need, when all that's at stake, their real priorities emerge, and their priorities are that they want affordable energy and reliable employment.
And we've just seen that, of course, in our Alberta election as well. Professor McKittrick, one of my concerns is that we are perhaps teaching our younger generation that it's not okay to disagree with something that's politically correct, societal belief. Somehow this is considered extreme or hateful. We're told what to think and believe, but not how to think for ourselves. That's scary to me. Any thoughts on that? I mean, we see this in our education system, I think, in post-secondary.
Well, I can remember in school learning the fable of the emperor with no clothes, and it's told in a way that the message to young people is you should be like that. You should be the brave one in the crowd who's willing to just ignore the consensus of what everybody else is saying and just tell it like it is, and tell us what you see and what you think. And and I'm sure that's still taught, and I'm sure in principle teachers want their students to do that. But then, as you've alluded to, when that actually happens, then suddenly we discover that society isn't nearly as hospitable to people speaking out against popular consensus positions. And maybe it's always been that way. I'm not a student of history, but I'm sure that there are just lots of episodes throughout history where there does actually emerge a very strong social consensus, and suddenly real debate becomes almost impossible, and very few people are willing to speak up on it. And I think the lesson out of those episodes is then you better pay attention to those people that do speak up, even if there aren't very many of them. Listen carefully, because if it's costly for people to speak up against a consensus, and they're doing it out of a sense of conviction, then chances are they have something important to say, and you better pay attention to it.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Professor McKittrick, and I appreciate your courage in taking the risk to speak out on this.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
All right. Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph, thank you so much for watching today.